The sandwich had been in Dale's coat pocket since noon. He had found it near the back of a gas station, one of those wrapped ones with the yellow label, the kind that sat under a heat lamp too long and smelled faintly of plastic. The cashier had been throwing it out, Dale had asked. Politely, the cashier had shrugged and handed it over. He had been saving it all day. It was past midnight now. The city had gone quiet in the way cities only go. Quiet in winter, not truly silent, just muffled, like someone had laid a blanket over everything. Dale walked with his hands in his pockets and his head down, boots scraping the wet pavement. His camp under the bridge was another 10 minutes away. His knees hurt. They always hurt in the cold. He cut through the alley behind the convenience store on Mercer Street. Because it was shorter and because the wind did not reach there, the dumpsters smelled like old grease and cardboard. Single bulb buzzed above the back door, throwing pale yellow light over the wet ground. He almost missed them. They were tucked between the back of the dumpster and the brick wall, two shapes curled into each other so tightly they looked like one thing at first, small, smaller than he expected once he stopped and looked, about the size of large cats, maybe a little bigger, dark and pale, pressed together, scaled. Dale stopped walking. He stood there for a moment and looked at them. They were not cats. They were not any animal he had seen before. Their skin, if you could call it skin, caught the light the way wet stone does. One was dark, almost black, with a long, narrow snout and claws that curled against the concrete. The other was lighter gray with something silver at the edges, its face tucked under the dark one's neck. Both of them were shaking. Dale had seen shaking like that before, in men who had been out in the cold too long, in people who had stopped being able to feel their hands and did not know it yet, the kind of shaking that was not panic but something worse. Body simply doing what it had to do to keep going. He did not think very long. He reached into his pocket and took out the sandwich. He crouched down a few feet away from them, unwrapped it slowly and tore it in half. He set both halves on the cleanest piece of ground he could find nearby. Then he stood back. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the dark one lifted its head, eyes like amber, not glowing, not supernatural, just that particular deep yellow that looked lit from behind. It stared at him. There was nothing afraid in that stare. There was something assessing about it, something that felt almost too old for a creature that small. It did not move toward the food. The lighter one stirred. It raised its head and looked at the sandwich halves, then looked at Dale. Its eyes were paler gold, almost white at the edges. It looked at him the way a child looks at something it does not have a word for yet. Then it moved forward and ate. Not frantically, not the way starving animals usually eat. It ate like it was trying to be dignified about the whole thing and was not quite managing. Small bites, deliberate. The dark one watched its companion eat. Then slowly it stretched forward and took the other half. It did not look away from Dale while it ate, not once. Dale reached into his pack and pulled out the spare coat he carried, a thin fleece a shelter had given him 2 weeks ago. He had been saving it in case the temperature dropped further. He shook it out and laid it gently across both of them, keeping his movements slow. The dark one flinched when the coat touched it. Its lip pulled back and Dale saw teeth, small but sharp, and heard something low and rattling in its chest. He pulled his hand back calmly. All right, he said quietly, all right. He stood, his knees protested. He looked at them once more, the small-scaled creatures under his spare coat, the sandwich wrappers already being pressed flat by the wind. He had nothing else to give them. He turned and walked out of the alley. He did not look back. It was not coldness. He had learned a long time ago that looking back at things you could not fix made the walk home longer. He reached his camp under the bridge, laid down on his cardboard, pulled his blanket over himself, and closed his eyes. His stomach was empty. He slept anyway. Under the dumpster 2 streets away, the dark one finished eating and pulled the fleece tighter around its companion with one claw. It sat awake for a long time, facing the direction the human had walked. It did not understand what had happened. It understood hunger. It understood cold. It understood that something with very little had given half of what it had to creatures it did not know, with no negotiation and no demand for anything in return. It sat with that thought for a long time. The lighter one had already fallen asleep, warm for the first time since they had landed on the strange, gray, wet world. The dark one kept watch until morning. 3 mornings later, Dale woke to the sound of breathing that was not his. He lay still for a moment under his blanket, eyes not yet open, listening. It was steady, low, coming from somewhere near his feet. He had slept in enough rough places to know the difference between wind and breath, between a stray animal and something deliberate. He opened his eyes. They were sitting at the foot of his cardboard, the dark one and the lighter one, perfectly upright, watching him the way cats watch a door, patient, unblinking, still wearing his spare fleece, which had somehow stayed on the lighter one like a lopsided shawl. Dale sat up slowly, his back cracked. He looked at them, they looked at him. No, he said. Neither of them moved. He rubbed his face with both hands. He had slept badly. His left shoulder ached. He was hungry. He looked at the 2 scaled creatures sitting in his camp, as if they had always been there, and he felt something between exhaustion and a reluctant kind of understanding. He stood, picked up his collection bag, and walked out from under the bridge. They followed him, not right behind him, not at his heel. Like dogs, a little distance back, 20, maybe 30 feet, if he stopped and turned. They stopped and stood. When he moved, again they moved. The dark one walked in front. The lighter one drifted to the side, head turning at every sound, every passing car, every pigeon. Dale spent the morning doing what he always did. He checked the recycling bins near the apartment complex on 4th. He sorted through the cans behind the restaurant on Dunn Street. He traded a handful of sorted bottles at the collection point near the park and got enough for a cup of coffee and a bread roll from the cart outside. He broke the bread roll into 3 pieces without really meaning to. He handed 2 pieces back without looking at them. The lighter one took its piece delicately. The dark one hesitated for just a moment, that same assessing pause as before, and then took it. Dale drank his coffee and watched the road. Around midday, a city maintenance worker in a yellow vest came around the corner of the recycling lane and stopped hard. When he saw the twins, his eyes went wide. He took a step back, stumbled, and said something into his radio that Dale couldn't hear from where he was standing. Dale did not wait to find out what came next. He crouched down and opened his coat. "Come here," he said quietly and firmly. The lighter one tilted its head, then it walked forward and pressed itself against his side. He pulled the coat around it. The dark one watched this and made a sound low in its throat, not a growl, something more complicated than that. "You too," Dale said, looking at it directly. A pause, then the dark one moved in on the other side. Dale stood and walked, his coat bulged. He kept his pace steady and normal. He did not look back at the worker. He turned at the first corner, then again at the next, then cut through the parking structure on Wells and came out 2 blocks east. He sat on a bench near the old library and let them out. The lighter one shook itself and looked up at him with those pale gold eyes. Then it said, very carefully in a voice like gravel being sorted, "Why?" Dale stared at it. It said it again, "Why?" Not a question. Exactly, more like it had found the word and wanted to check that it worked. He thought about it honestly. He could have said many things. He could have said it was instinct or habit or because he didn't want trouble from the authorities. All of those things were partly true because no one else was going to, he said. The lighter one was quiet for a moment. Then it turned and said something to the dark one, a sound that was not English, not any human language, something that moved through registers Dale could feel in his back teeth. The dark one looked at Dale. It did not say anything, but it stopped the low watching sound it had been making since morning. Dale took that as progress. He spent the rest of the afternoon figuring out where to move his camp. Worker had seen them. The radio had been involved. That meant questions, and questions meant attention, and attention meant he needed to be somewhere else by nightfall. He picked up his things from the bridge and moved to the old rail yard on the south side of the district, a stretch of abandoned track bed behind a chain link fence that had been broken in the same spot for 2 years. There was a concrete shelter there, half a roof, enough to block the wind. The twins helped without being asked. The dark one dragged a piece of salvaged wood that was twice its size. It did not ask for help. It did not look at Dale for approval. It just worked. The lighter one carried smaller pieces, arranged them, and then sat back and looked at the structure with something that might have been satisfaction. Dale unrolled his blanket in the shelter and sat down. His knee was worse tonight. He wrapped it with a strip of cloth he kept in the bag and then looked out at the darkening rail yard. The twins settled on either side of him without discussion. He did not tell them to stay. He did not tell them to go. He looked at the sky through the broken roof and thought about the word they lighter one had said and the answer he had given, and how both things felt more true than most things he had said in years. By the end of the second week, Dale had accepted 3 things. First, the twins were not leaving. Second, they were growing. Third, whatever they were not stupid, not even close. The lighter one, which Dale had started calling Saw in his head because it made sounds closest to that when it spoke to the dark one, had picked up English fast, not from any teaching. Dale did not sit down and explain words. It just listened to everything, to him, to people they passed on the street, to the radio someone left on outside the laundromat on Reed Avenue, and it absorbed it the way dry ground absorbs rain. By day 10, it was using 3-word sentences. By day 14, it was asking questions. The dark one, Rav, did not try to speak English, but it understood more than it. Let on, Dale could tell by the way its head moved when someone said something important. The camp at the rail yard had gotten better. Dale had found a tarp. Rav had dragged in 3 broken pallets from somewhere without being asked, and Dale had used them to build a raised floor so the cold did not come up through the concrete. It was cramped. It was drafty. It was the best shelter Dale had had in 2 years. He showed Rav how to bend a pallet board by leveraging it against a fixed edge. Rather than forcing it straight, Rav watched once, did it correctly. The second time did not look to Dale for confirmation. That was the thing about Rav. He did not look for approval. He looked for information, and once he had it, he used it, and that was the end of it. Saw was the opposite. Saw wanted to understand the why behind everything. What is this? Saw asked one evening, holding up a coil of rope Dale had pulled from a skip. Rope, Dale said. For what? Holding things together. Saw turned it over. How much weight? Dale glanced at it. That one, maybe 200 lb if the knot is right. Show the knot. So Dale showed the knot, and then another knot, and then Saw made Rav come over and watch, and Rav watched with the expression of someone who was pretending not to be interested. That same week, 3 men came to the rail yard at night. They had seen Dale there before, alone, and they had decided that alone meant easy. They came with a specific kind of loud confidence that meant they were more afraid than they looked and were covering it with noise. Dale stood up slowly when they got close. He was not afraid. He was tired, which was a different thing, and sometimes being tired looked enough like calm to confuse people. He did not see Rav move. He just heard the sound, a sharp crack, like a match being struck on stone, and then a burst of light, and then one of the men was making a very high sound and patting his sleeve because the cuff of his jacket was smoldering. It was not a large flame. It was barely more than a flicker, a short orange tongue from between Rav's teeth, but it was enough. The 3 men left quickly. Rav stood in the middle of the rail yard, looking at his own jaw with something between surprise and a very carefully controlled pride. His chest was moving faster than usual. He looked at his claws, then at the scorch mark on the ground, then at Dale. Dale picked up his blanket, which had fallen when he stood up. He shook it out. Good, he said. Now help me move the camp. They might come back with more people and a better idea. Saw relayed this in their language. A short, dense sound. Rav looked at Dale for 2 full seconds. Then he picked up a pallet without a word. They moved the camp to the far end of the yard behind a section of old signal housing that blocked the sight line from the fence. It took an hour. Rav carried the heavy pieces, Saw organized, directed, and did the parts that needed hands with fingers. When it was done, they sat in the new shelter, and Dale split a can of beans 3 ways cold because he had no way to heat them, and they ate quietly in the dark. Your fire, Dale said after a while. Has that happened before? Saw and Rav exchanged something, not words, just a look. No, Saw said, first time. Does it hurt? Saw asked Rav. Rav answered briefly. Saw said, he says it felt like sneezing. Dale nodded slowly. Right, he ate another spoonful of beans. Don't use it unless you have to. People around here get strange about things they don't understand. Rav tilted his head, and for the first time something in his expression shifted into what Dale could only read as dry agreement. Dale looked out at the dark rail yard and said nothing more. He thought about what it meant that a creature he had met behind a dumpster 2 weeks ago had just produced fire from its mouth to protect him, and he decided that thinking too hard about it was not going to help anything tonight. He lay down. The twins settled in their usual places. The cold came in through the gaps in the tarp, but less than before. Rav stayed awake after the other two were asleep. He looked at the man who had told him where to move, how to work a knot, and what to do after showing strength. He was trying to understand him. He had not managed it yet. He was starting to think that might take a long time. Verath saw it on camera feed 17. He had been reviewing the city's open network footage as part of the standard diplomatic security sweep, looking for signs of civil unrest near the Dravith consulate. Nothing unusual. It was routine work, dull work. Then he saw the market. A human male, middle-aged, worn coat, moving through the stalls on the South District Street Market. Behind him, at a careful distance, 2 young Dravith. Verath stopped the feed. He leaned forward. He ran the image through the scale pattern registry that every Dravith diplomat carried, because scale patterns were like fingerprints, unique to every individual and documented from birth for anyone of standing. The system came back in 4 seconds. Verath sat very still for a long time. Then he closed the registry, locked his office, and spent 10 minutes doing nothing but breathing. The twins, the Emperor's sons, Rav and saw heirs to the Dravith throne, future rulers of 14 star systems and 11 vassal worlds, were walking through a human street market behind a man carrying a bag of recycled cans. He did not call the extraction team. Extracting members of the royal line without imperial authorization was not a mistake you made and survived. He did not call the consulate security chief either, because the security chief would call the extraction team. Instead, he called his 2 most quiet, most discreet field observers and told them to find the human and watch, not approach, not interfere, watch and report. They found the camp at the rail yard by the second day. They observed for 48 hours. What they reported back was not what Verath had expected. The twins were not captive. There were no restraints, no visible threats, no leverage. They moved freely. They could have left at any time. They had not left. The human, name unknown, status unclear, clearly without resources or shelter of any formal kind, interacted with them as if they were something between a responsibility and a companionship. He divided food equally. He showed them things. He spoke to them without the deference or the fear that every other human who caught so much as a glimpse of them displayed. The dark twin, Rav, had produced fire in a defensive action, protecting the human. 3 nights ago, this was the twins' first recorded fire manifestation, a significant developmental milestone, occurring not in a palace training ground but in a human rail yard in defense of a homeless man. Verath read the report twice, then he drafted the hardest message of his diplomatic career and sent it through the encrypted imperial line. Subject: the princes are alive. You need to know where. He did not sleep that night. Meanwhile, Dale noticed the watchers on the second afternoon. He did not see them. They were Professionals, but he felt the quality of the space around him change, the way a room feels different when someone is in it even before you see them, the way a quiet street has a different texture when it is being watched. He had learned to read that feeling a long time ago in places where reading it wrong got people killed. He did not react. He did not tell the twins. He went through his day the same way he always did. That evening he said while sorting cans by the signal housing, "We're moving tonight." Saul looked up. "Why?" "Just feels right." Saul translated for Rav. Rav looked out at the yard for a moment, then he started picking up the heavy pieces without being asked. They moved before midnight, not to another section of the yard, but out of it entirely through a gap in the east fence and into the warren of narrow service lanes behind the old warehouse district. Dale knew those lanes well. He had spent a winter there once. The observers lost them in under an hour. Verath's field team reported back at 2:00 in the morning. Subjects had relocated, position unknown. Verath sent a second message to the Imperial line. The response came within the hour, which meant someone had been waiting at the other end. It said, "I am already traveling. Do not lose them again." Verath looked at those words for a long time. He thought about the human in the worn coat who had somehow, without knowing it, become the most politically complicated person on earth. He thought about what the Emperor was like when his sons were involved. He thought about the report detail he kept coming back to, the part where the observer noted that the human on the morning of the second day had divided a bread roll into 3 equal pieces, without pause or calculation, as if it was simply the thing you did. He pulled up camera feed 17 again. Watch the market clip from the beginning. The twins walked behind the human with a particular quality of movement, unhurried, attentive, like guards who were not performing the job but simply doing it. Verath had worked in the Emperor's court for 11 years. He had seen how Dravith royalty moved around people they respected. He shut the feed off. He had paperwork to do, lots of it. And somewhere in the city, a man with sore knees and an empty stomach was setting up camp in a new alley, and 2 future kings were helping him without being asked, and none of them had any idea what was coming. Dale woke to pressure. Not sound, just a change in the air. Drop in temperature that had nothing to do with weather, and a feeling like the space above the city had gotten smaller. He had felt something like it once before during a test detonation. He'd been too close to the moment before the sound arrived. He opened his eyes. The twins were already awake. They were standing, both of them, upright in a way they rarely stood, their usual loose ease replaced by something stiff and formal. Rav was in front. Saul was half a step behind. They were facing the far end of the alley. Something was landing in the park 2 streets over. Dale could not see it. He could hear it. Not the roar of engines, but a lower sound, the kind that moved through the ground rather than the air. He could feel the light changing, a cold blue glow that came from no direction in particular and then faded. He stood, pulled on his coat, and waited. They came around the corner at 3:00 a.m. 12 figures in a formation that was not quite military but not casual either, moving with the specific precision of people who never had to hurry because Nothing moved faster than they allowed. Their armor, if it was armor, caught the alley light and gave nothing back. They were tall, too tall. And at the center of them, the one who made the others look like furniture. He was enormous. Not in the way of large men or large animals, but in the way of things that occupied space differently from everything around them, dark, scaled, ancient in a way that had nothing to do with frailty, with eyes that were the same amber as Rav's, but deeper, like the color had been burning. Longer he moved without sound. He looked at the alley, at the makeshift camp, at the man standing in front of it. He looked at Dale for a long time. Rav made a sound, short, tight, and dropped his head. It was not like any movement Dale had seen from him. Rav, who had carried pallets without flinching and produced fire without flinching, went very still in a way that looked almost like holding breath. Saul did the same, quiet, controlled. Something that was neither shame nor fear, but the very precise recognition of authority. The large one spoke. His English was perfect, cleaner than Saul's, more measured, with no gaps or searches for words. You fed my sons. Dale looked at him, at the size of him, at the 12 behind him, at the weight of what was obviously happening here. They were hungry, Dale said. Silence. One of the 12 shifted slightly. The large one did not. You gave them shelter. It was cold. You moved camp when they were at risk. Multiple times. That's just sense. Another silence, longer this time. What do you want? The large one said. In return. Dale had known men who asked that question. It always meant they expected an answer involving something large. Money, power, favor, protection. It was the question of people who understood the world as a system of transactions. He thought about it honestly. He stood in his worn coat in a service alley with sore knees and an empty stomach, and he thought about what he wanted. Nothing, he said. I wasn't doing it for return. The 12 were very still. The large one looked at him with an expression that Dale could not fully read, something shifting behind those deep amber eyes, something that was running very fast through some kind of internal calculation. You are aware, the large one said slowly, of who my sons are? No, Dale said. Are you going to tell me? The large one looked at him. They are heirs to the Dravith throne, rulers of 14 systems by inheritance, future commanders of a fleet that has not lost a war in 600 years. Dale looked at Rav and Saul. Rav was staring at the ground. Saul was watching Dale with those pale gold eyes, and his expression was something Dale had not seen before on either of them, something that looked very much like waiting to see what a person would do. Dale looked back at the large one. All right, he said. That was all he said. The large one stared. He had ruled 14 systems for longer than most human civilizations had existed. He had received declarations of war and treaties of surrender and the oaths of planetary governors. He had been argued at, pleaded at, begged at, bargained at. He had never been told, all right. He looked at this man, this small, quiet, worn-out human with nothing, and he did the only thing that felt correct. He went to one knee. Not the full kneel of submission. Something else, one knee down, head level, the Dravith gesture that had not been directed at a non-Dravith in living memory, the gesture that meant, I see someone worth seeing. The 12 behind him hesitated for Fraction of a second, then they followed. Saul let out a breath. Rav raised his head. Dale looked at all of them kneeling in the alley. He looked at his camp behind him. He looked at the sky starting to go pale at its edges. Is there somewhere we could talk that isn't this alley? He asked. By noon it was on the news. Every channel, every feed, every alert. On every device in the city, and then the country, and then within 6 hours. Everywhere that received transmissions. The Dravith Emperor had come to Earth. Unannounced. He had knelt in a service. Ali at 3:00 in the morning, his heirs had been living in the city for 3 weeks. In the company of a homeless veteran. The photographs appeared first, then they footage from a building security camera. Mostly shadow and blue light, but enough. The Emperor on one knee, 12 guards behind him, a man in a worn coat. Standing in front of them all, hands in his pockets, looking like he was waiting for a bus. The consulate issued no statement by morning, neither did any government, no. One had a category for what had happened. Yet, Dale spent that morning in a room on the consulate's second floor, sitting in a chair that was designed for a body larger than his, drinking water from a cup that was also too large, listening to Ambassador Verith explain the situation in the careful tone of a man who was managing several disasters at once. The core of it was this: under Dravith law, a bond guardian was not a servant and not a hired hand. It was a formal relationship with weight when an heir had been sheltered and protected by someone outside the bloodline in a time of genuine need, not arranged, not contracted, just done. The person became part of the royal household's obligation structure. It was an old law, old enough that no one had needed to apply it in several centuries. No one had expected to apply it to a human. Dale listened to all of this. He asked 2 questions. The first was whether he had to live in the consulate. The second was whether Rav and Sal had to go back immediately. The answers were no, and not immediately. He nodded and drank his water. The Emperor met with him again that afternoon in a smaller room without the 12. He sat across from Dale with the particular stillness of something ancient that had learned patience through practice. He asked what Dale wanted. Dale had thought about this since the alley. He had turned it over all morning, while Verith talked and while cameras flashed outside and while the world tried to decide how to react to something it had no file for. There's a group of people who sleep under the Mercer Street Bridge, Dale said. 7 of them right now, maybe 9 in winter. They need food, gear, medical attention. A few of them need help with documents. The Emperor looked at him. That is what you want. That's what I want. Not for yourself. I've been fine. You have been sleeping on cardboard. I've slept on worse. The Emperor was quiet for a moment. Then it will be arranged. What else? That's it. The Emperor looked at him with that expression again, the one from the alley, running calculations behind old eyes. You understand that you are entitled to significantly more than 8 for 7 people. I know. And you are choosing not to take it. I don't need it. A pause. You may need it later. If I do, I'll ask. The Emperor tilted his head slightly. You will ask directly. That's generally how asking works. Dale said. Something moved in the Emperor's expression that might, on a different face, have been the beginning of a smile. He made a short sound, not quite Agreement, not quite amusement. Somewhere in between. He approved everything Dale had asked. For before the day was out, the Mercer Street arrangement, medical documents, supplies. He also, through Verith, set up a small housing arrangement for Dale, not in the consulate, not anything grand, just solid room in a building nearby with working heat and a lock on the door. Dale accepted it without argument, because his knee had been bad for a week, and he knew what a bad winter would do to it. Rav and Sal came to find him that evening while he was sitting on the steps outside the housing building, watching the street. Rav sat next to him, not close enough to touch, just next to. They sat for a while without talking. Then Rav said in English, the first English Dale had heard from him directly, "You asked for the bridge people." "Yes." Rav was quiet. "Then not for yourself?" "No." Another silence. Rav looked at the street. His jaw was set in that way it had when he was working through something that had more weight than he wanted to admit. "Why?" he said. It was the same word Sal had said on the bench outside the library, but Rav's version had a different shape to it. Less a question about mechanics and more a question about what kind of thing person had to be to work that way. Dale thought about it. "Because I know what it's like under that bridge," he said, "and I can do something about it now, so I did." Rav said nothing. Sal, sitting on Dale's other side, translated the silence for Dale in a way that required no words, just a small, satisfied sound. The street was ordinary, people walking, a delivery truck, pigeons. Dale sat between two future kings in the evening light in a coat that had seen better decades, with sore knees, and a room with a lock on the door, and 7 people who would eat tonight because he had asked one question in one room. He thought that was enough. He thought on reflection that it was more than enough. The Emperor stood at the consulate window above the street, looking down at the three of them on the steps. Verith stood behind him with a tablet full of things that needed decisions. The Emperor did not turn around for a long time. When he did, he said, "The human understands something about power that most rulers do not learn." Verith waited. "He knows what it is for," the Emperor said. He held out one hand for the tablet. "Now what needs to be signed?"